The ambulance arrived 17 minutes too late. But the truth is, it was already too late 6 weeks earlier, when pride became more dangerous than any disease. November 2nd. A quiet street in Timber Falls, Oregon. Sirens shattered the stillness as neighbors emerged from warm houses into cold night air, breath visible, faces tight with dread. They watched paramedics rush into Marcus Reeves' small rental home and emerge minutes later carrying a stretcher, a small form covered completely. No urgency in their steps anymore. And they heard the sound that would haunt that neighborhood forever. A father's anguished screams, guttural and broken. The sound of a man who knew he'd just lost everything. How does a parent who loves their child let them die? Have you ever been too proud to ask for help? Too afraid of judgment to reach out when you were drowning? Have you ever convinced yourself you could handle something alone, even as it spiraled beyond your control? Most of us have experienced that impulse. That voice that says asking for help means admitting failure. But what happens when that voice becomes louder than your child's suffering? When does trying to handle everything alone stop being strength and start being fatal? If you've ever struggled alone because asking for help felt like admitting defeat, this story will break your heart and maybe save someone else's. Hit that like button because this conversation needs to happen. Lives depend on it. Marcus Reeves was 36 years old and looked 50. The kind of exhaustion that shows in the eyes, in the way shoulders curve forward under invisible weight. He worked at the Cascade Lumber Mill on the edge of Timber Falls, operating machinery that turned raw timber into planks, breathing sawdust 10 hours a day, sometimes 12 when overtime was available. His hands were calloused, his back perpetually aching, but he never complained. Complaining was a luxury for people with options. He was raising his daughter Lily alone, 7 years old, bright-eyed, with her mother's smile and a passion for drawing that filled their small house with crayon masterpieces taped to every wall. Marcus kept them all, even the scribbles from when she was 3, even the ones that were just enthusiastic swirls of color. They were proof that something beautiful existed in his life. Evidence that not everything had been taken from him. 18 months earlier, Marcus had lost his wife Elena to pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis came fast and brutal. Stage 4 inoperable, 6 months if they were lucky. They got 8. 8 months of watching the woman he loved disappear, of medical appointments and treatments that bought days but couldn't buy years, of holding her hand while she made him promise to take care of their baby girl. Elena died on a Tuesday morning in spring. With crocuses blooming outside the hospice window and Lily at school, spared from witnessing her mother's final breath. Marcus never properly grieved. Couldn't afford to. There was a funeral to plan, a child to comfort, bills that didn't care about his shattered heart. Elena's medical treatment had left him $47,000 in debt despite insurance. The hospital sent payment plan letters monthly, polite reminders that his wife's death came with a price tag. He paid what he could. $50 here, $75 there, knowing he'd never see the end of it. His neighbors in Timber Falls saw a devoted father doing his best under impossible circumstances. They saw him pack Lily's lunch every morning, walk her to the bus stop holding her small hand in his work roughened one, help her with homework at the kitchen table despite barely staying awake. They saw a man who kept Elena's memory alive, who answered Lily's questions about heaven with patient tenderness, who never missed a parent-teacher conference, even if it meant losing wages. What they didn't see was his fear, the fear that kept him awake at 3 a.m. calculating which bills could be paid late, which utilities could be shut off temporarily and restored later. The fear of one more crisis, one more unexpected expense that would topple a precarious tower he'd built to keep them afloat. And beneath all of it, the terror of Child Protective Services, a fear rooted in stories he'd heard, rumors of children taken from good parents over unpaid bills and missed appointments, of the state deciding that poverty equaled unfitness. Marcus had developed a mantra, something he repeated to himself when the walls felt like they were closing in. We take care of our own. We don't need handouts. It was pride, yes, but it was also survival instinct twisted into something dangerous. Asking for help felt like admitting he couldn't honor Elena's dying wish. It felt like failing her all over again. He couldn't see what everyone around him knew, that he was drowning, and that Lily was going under with him. Late September arrived with the first real chill of autumn, and with it came the subtle changes that would eventually scream warnings no one wanted to hear. Ms. Hoffman, Lily's second-grade teacher, noticed first. Lily had always been energetic during recess, organizing elaborate games to pretend with classmates, but now she sat on the bench more often, claiming she was tired. Ms. Hoffman made a mental note, the kind teachers make a dozen times a day, filed under "keep an eye on this." A week later, Lily was absent, then absent again 3 days after returning, then twice more in the following week. Marcus called the attendance line each time with the same explanation: stomach bug, seasonal cold, nothing serious. Ms. Hoffman left a voicemail suggesting a parent conference. Marcus never called back. Mrs. Kowalski, who lived 2 houses down and had known Elena before the cancer, saw Lily playing in the yard one October afternoon and felt her chest tighten with concern. The child looked thinner, paler, like a faded photograph of herself. She mentioned it to Marcus the next time their paths crossed at the mailbox, keeping her tone casual to avoid seeming intrusive. "Is Lily feeling okay? She looks a little under the weather." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just a cold going around. She'll bounce back. Kids always do." Mrs. Kowalski nodded, unconvinced but unwilling to push. What could she say? That his daughter looked sick? He was her father. Surely he knew best. Surely he was handling it. She went back inside feeling uneasy, but telling herself it wasn't her place to interfere. This became the pattern. People noticed. People worried quietly. People respected boundaries. Lily mentioned to her best friend Sophie during a rare day at school that she didn't feel good, but Daddy says doctors cost too much. Sophie's mother, overhearing this while driving carpool, felt alarm bells ring. She considered calling someone, the school counselor, maybe, or CPS, but hesitated. What if she was overreacting? What if she destroyed a grieving father's life over a kid's offhand comment? What if she made things worse? She decided to wait, to see if things improved. They didn't. The school nurse sent home a flyer about free health clinics operating in the county, part of a federally funded rural health initiative. It was tucked into Lily's backpack with a dozen other papers, permission slips, fundraiser forms, cafeteria menus. Marcus glanced through the stack while eating leftover chili straight from the pot, too tired to bother with a bowl, and tossed it all in the recycling bin. He didn't read carefully enough to see the lifeline being offered. By mid-October, Lily's cough had become a constant companion. It rattled in her small chest, persistent and wet, the kind of cough that makes adults wince in recognition that something is wrong. She stopped eating much, picking at the dinners Marcus prepared, claiming nothing tasted right. Her clothes hung looser. Dark circles bloomed under her eyes. Marcus tried everything he knew. Children's cough syrup from the dollar store, measured carefully according to the label. Steam treatments, running hot water in the bathroom until it fogged, sitting with her while she breathed the humid air. Extra blankets piled on her bed. Chicken soup heated from cans. All the home remedies his own mother had used. The folk medicine of people who couldn't afford doctors. She stayed home from school for an entire week. Marcus burned through his meager paid time off and then took unpaid leave, sitting beside her bed during the day, watching her sleep, telling himself she just needed rest. His supervisor at the mill, a decent man with his own struggles, called him in for an uncomfortable conversation. "I like you, Marcus. You're a good worker, but I can't keep holding your spot if you're not here. I've got quotas to meet, and corporate doesn't care about anybody's problems." Marcus understood. He always understood. Understanding didn't make it easier. The bills piled higher. A late notice arrived for rent, printed in red ink that felt accusatory. The electricity bill went past due. He stood in his kitchen at midnight, calculator in hand, trying to make impossible math work. If he paid the rent, they'd have no electricity. If he paid the electricity, they'd face eviction. If he took Lily to the doctor and they found something serious, something requiring tests, hospitalization, treatment, they'd lose everything. The house of cards would collapse. He convinced himself, if I take her to the doctor and they find something serious, we'll lose everything. She just needs rest. Kids bounce back. She's strong like her mother. But Lily wasn't bouncing back. "Daddy, my chest hurts when I breathe," she told him one evening, her voice small and frightened. "That's just a cough, baby. It'll pass. I promise." He smoothed her hair back from her forehead, felt the heat radiating from her skin, told himself it was just a fever, normal for colds. He started isolating them, though he didn't recognize it as isolation. When Mrs. Kowalski knocked, he didn't answer, pretending they weren't home. When Ms. Hoffman called about Lily's absences, he let it go to voicemail, deleted the messages without listening fully. When neighbors asked how things were going, he kept conversations brief, deflected with reassurances, hurried back inside. Mrs. Kowalski confided her worries to another neighbor, a retired nurse named Patricia. "Something's not right over there. Lily looks worse every time I see her, and Marcus won't talk to anyone. But what can we do? We can't just barge in. He's her father." Patricia frowned. Sometimes being a good neighbor means being an uncomfortable neighbor. Maybe someone should call the school, express concern, and have him hate us? Have CPS tear that family apart over what might be nothing? Mrs. Kowalski shook her head. He's been through enough. So they watched, and worried, and did nothing. By late October, Lily could barely get out of bed. Her breathing had become labored, shallow, each breath requiring visible effort. Her lips took on a bluish tint that Marcus noticed and explained away. Poor circulation, the cold weather, anything but what it actually meant. Her body was failing to get enough oxygen. Marcus sat beside her bed every night after his shifts, holding her small hand, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore, crying silent tears that soaked his pillow when he finally collapsed into his own bed at 2 a.m. But he still didn't call for help. His justification had calcified into absolute certainty. "If I call 911, they'll take her away from me. CPS will say I'm an unfit parent. They'll put her in the system, and I'll never get her back. I'll lose her just like I lost Elena." What Marcus didn't know, what no one could see, was that Lily had developed bacterial pneumonia weeks earlier, left untreated. It had progressed steadily, her small body fighting an infection it had no chance of defeating alone. By the end of October, the infection had spread to her bloodstream. She was in septic shock, her immune system overwhelmed, her organs beginning the slow process of failure. All of it preventable, all of it treatable with antibiotics, fluids, and basic medical care. All of it invisible to a father too terrified to ask for help. If this is hard to watch, it should be. Sometimes the stories that matter most are the ones that make us uncomfortable, the ones that force us to ask difficult questions about ourselves and our communities. Comment below. Have you ever seen warning signs and stayed silent? Have you ever been the person too proud to ask for help? What would you do differently? And please share this video. Someone watching right now might be Marcus. Someone might be Mrs. Kowalski. They need to know that silence has consequences. They need to know there's still time to change the ending. November 2nd began like too many others. Marcus dragging himself to the mill despite exhaustion. Lily sleeping fitfully in her bed. Neighbors go about their routines on a street that looked peaceful from the outside. Marcus came home at 6 p.m. to find Lily exactly where he'd left her that morning. She hadn't moved, hadn't eaten the crackers and juice he'd left on her nightstand. He touched her forehead and jerked his hand back. Her skin was burning, hotter than he'd ever felt. "Lily? Baby, can you hear me?" She didn't respond. Her eyes moved beneath closed lids, but she didn't wake. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, her small chest rising and falling too quickly, her lips decidedly blue. Panic seized him. Real panic. The kind that bypasses pride and fear and every self-imposed barrier. He shook her gently. "Lily, wake up. Please wake up." Nothing. Marcus grabbed his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. The 3 numbers he'd been too afraid to press for 6 weeks suddenly became the only numbers that mattered. 911, what's your emergency? "My daughter. She won't wake up. Please, I need help." His voice cracked, words tumbling out incoherently. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professionally trained for crisis. "Sir, I need you to take a breath. How old is your daughter?" 7. "She's 7. She's been sick, and now she won't respond." "Is she breathing?" Marcus looked. forcing himself to focus through terror. Yes, but it's really fast, really shallow. Does she have a pulse? Can you check her wrist and neck? He found it, faint and racing. Yes, she has a pulse. Okay, help is on the way. Stay on the line with me. How long has she been sick? The question hit like a physical blow. How long? Weeks. He let this go on for weeks. A while. Please just send someone. The ambulance took 17 minutes to arrive, standard for their rural location, but eternal for Marcus. He stayed on the line with the dispatcher, following instructions, cradling Lily's limp body, whispering apologies and prayers and promises he knew he couldn't keep. When paramedics rushed through the door, they moved with practiced efficiency that somehow conveyed urgency. They checked vital signs, asked rapid-fire questions Marcus could barely answer, loaded Lily onto a stretcher with frightening speed. Their faces told a story their words didn't. This was bad. Marcus rode in the ambulance, holding Lily's hand, watching paramedics work, hearing medical terminology he didn't understand. Systemic infection, septic shock, respiratory distress. Numbers were called out: blood pressure, oxygen saturation, heart rate, all of them clearly wrong, clearly dangerous. Please save her, he begged. Please, I'll do anything. The paramedic met his eyes with something that might have been compassion, or might have been judgment. We're doing everything we can. At the hospital, Lily was rushed into emergency treatment. Marcus was left in a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and despair, fluorescent lights humming overhead. A TV in the corner, playing news no one was watching. He sat with his head in his hands, playing back every moment he could have made a different choice, every warning sign he'd ignored. Every time he'd chosen pride over action. 40 minutes passed. A lifetime compressed into 40 minutes. The doctor who finally emerged looked exhausted in a way that transcended lack of sleep. Mr. Reeves? I'm Dr. Patterson. I need to speak with you about Lily. Marcus stood on legs that barely held him. He knew before the doctor spoke. Knew from the tone, from the expression, from the way the words came slowly. We did everything we could. I'm so sorry. Lily passed away about 10 minutes ago. The world tilted. Marcus heard the words, but couldn't process them, couldn't make them mean what they meant. No, you have to try again. Mr. Reeves. Her body had been fighting a systemic infection for some time. By the time she arrived, she was in multi-organ failure. There was nothing we could do at that point. What do you mean sometime? What infection? Dr. Patterson's face was carefully neutral, professional. Bacterial pneumonia that progressed to sepsis. Based on the severity, I'd estimate she'd been seriously ill for at least 3 to 4 weeks, possibly longer. But it was just a cough. Mr. Reeves, if she'd been brought in 2 weeks ago, even 10 days ago, this would have been completely treatable. A course of antibiotics, for fluids, monitoring. She would have been home in a few days. She would have been fine. The words detonated in Marcus's mind. Treatable. She would have been fine. He collapsed. Not gracefully, not dramatically. His legs simply stopped working. He went down hard, and the sound that came from him was inhuman. The sound of a man realizing he'd killed the person he loved most in the world, that his fear had been more dangerous than any disease, that he'd had the power to save her and had chosen not to use it. The investigation began within hours, efficient and thorough in the way these things are when a child dies and neglect is suspected. Child Protective Services arrived at the hospital, asked gentle questions that felt like accusations, documented everything. The police came too, not with handcuffs but with notebooks, taking statements, building a case. School records were pulled, showing 3 weeks of consecutive absences with vague explanations. Neighbors were interviewed. Mrs. Kowalski, Sophie's mother, Ms. Hoffman, all of them saying variations of the same thing. We noticed something was wrong. We were worried. We didn't know what to do. The medical examiner's report was damning in its clinical precision. Death by septic shock resulting from untreated bacterial pneumonia, entirely preventable with basic medical intervention. The timeline was reconstructed. Lily had likely contracted the initial infection in late September, developed pneumonia by early October, and entered septic shock in the final week of her life. Criminal charges were filed 2 weeks after Lily's death. Criminally negligent homicide. The prosecutor was a woman named Sarah Chun, mother 3, who took no pleasure in prosecuting a grieving father, but believed firmly in accountability. This case isn't about whether Marcus Reeves loved his daughter, she told the grand jury. By all accounts, he did. This is about whether love without action constitutes adequate parenting. It's about whether a parent's fear justifies a child's death. And the answer, under the law, is no. Marcus's defense attorney, a public defender named James Norton who'd seen too many cases like this, tried to provide context. He brought in character witnesses, co-workers who testified about Marcus's work ethic and devotion to Lily, neighbors who described how hard he'd tried after Elena's death. A psychologist testified about complicated grief, about how trauma can impair judgment, about the paralysis that poverty induces. Marcus took the stand, a decision Norton advised against, but Marcus insisted on. He needed to speak, needed to explain, even though no explanation could justify the outcome. I thought I was protecting her, he said, tears streaming openly. I thought if I could just get through it without doctors, without more bills, without the government getting involved, I thought we'd be okay. I thought she'd get better like kids always do. I didn't know. His voice broke. I didn't know I was killing her. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of his sobbing. The judge, Honorable Patricia Simmons, listened to 6 days of testimony before delivering her verdict. Her voice was firm but not unkind when she finally spoke directly to Marcus. Mr. Reeves, this court acknowledges the systemic failures that contributed to your situation. The medical debt that left you financially devastated. The lack of accessible health care in rural communities. The fear of a child protective system that too often fails the families it's meant to serve. These are real, these are significant, and they deserve attention and reform. But they do not excuse your inaction. Lily exhibited clear signs of serious illness for weeks. Multiple people expressed concern. Resources existed that you didn't access, not because they weren't available, but because your pride and fear prevented you from seeking them. Your daughter needed a parent who could put aside those fears to save her life. You loved her, Mr. Reeves. I don't doubt that. But love without action, when action is desperately needed, becomes negligence. And in this case, that negligence resulted in preventable death. She sentenced him to 10 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 6. Marcus accepted the sentence without reaction. What did prison matter? He was already living in one. The impact rippled through Timber Falls long after the trial ended. A town meeting was held at the community center. Standing room only, emotions running high. The question that dominated, how did we let this happen? Mrs. Kowalski spoke, her voice thick with guilt. I saw the signs. I knew something was wrong. I should have called someone. I should have knocked harder, demanded to see Lily, called CPS myself. I chose to respect his privacy over protecting that little girl, and I'll live with that forever. Ms. Hoffman echoed similar regrets. The system failed too. We have free clinics Marcus didn't know about, resources we never connected him to. We sent a flyer home and assumed that was enough. It wasn't enough. The school district implemented new protocols within months. Mandatory wellness checks for any child absent more than 5 consecutive days. Direct calls to parents to discuss resources. Partnerships with local health services to provide on-site screenings. The local health clinic, operated by a nonprofit called Mountain Valley Health, established a new program in Lily's name. Free, no questions asked pediatric care for any child in the county. No insurance required. No income verification. No judgment. Just care. They publicized it extensively. Flyers at every school, ads on local radio, announcements at community gatherings. The message was clear. No child should die because a parent was afraid to ask for help. A community fund was established to help families in financial crisis access health care. Small donations, mostly, from people who didn't have much themselves but understood how close they had come to being Marcus. How easily pride and fear could become lethal. And in the elementary school playground where Lily used to play, a small memorial bench was installed. Simple wood, weatherproofed and sturdy, with a brass plaque that read, For Lily, may we never look away again. It became a quiet place for reflection, a reminder carved in metal and wood that silence has consequences. Lily's story isn't unique. It's a pattern repeated across America with sickening regularity. The intersection of poverty, pride, and a healthcare system that treats medical care as a commodity rather than a right. Medical debt is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States. Families face impossible choices daily. Pay rent or see a doctor, buy groceries or fill prescriptions, keep the lights on or take a sick child to the emergency room. These shouldn't be choices anyone has to make, but they are, every single day. Rural areas face particularly severe healthcare gaps. Hospitals close. Clinics operate limited hours. Specialists are hours away. Even when care exists, accessing it requires transportation, time off work, child care for other children, resources that families like Marcus's simply don't have. Then there's the fear of child protective services. For parents already struggling, CPS represents an existential threat. Stories circulate, some true, some exaggerated, all terrifying, of children removed from loving homes because parents couldn't afford adequate housing or missed too many school days or sought help for drug addiction. This fear keeps vulnerable families from accessing services designed to help them. They suffer in silence rather than risk losing their children, not realizing that silence itself might cost them everything. The choices poverty creates are impossible by definition. Marcus had to choose between rent and doctor visits, between keeping his job and staying home with a sick child, between his pride and his daughter's health. He chose wrong, catastrophically wrong, but he was choosing from a menu where every option carried potentially devastating consequences. What Marcus didn't know could have saved Lily's life. The free clinic operated 30 miles away, open Saturdays, specifically designed for families like his. The hospital had a charity care program that would have covered Lily's treatment entirely based on his income. Emergency Medicaid would have been approved for her condition within days. Multiple neighbors would have helped if he'd only asked. Mrs. Kowalski would have driven them to appointments. Sophie's mother would have helped with bills. The retired nurse Patricia would have assessed Lily's condition and urged immediate care. The resources existed. The willingness to help existed. But pride and fear built a wall between Marcus and salvation. The cruel irony is almost unbearable. Marcus's greatest fear was losing Lily. Every decision he made, every time he chose to handle things alone, every moment he convinced himself he was protecting her, all of it was driven by desperate love and terror of losing his daughter. His actions, meant to prevent that loss, guaranteed the worst possible outcome. The community carries its own burden of guilt. How many people noticed warning signs but stayed silent? How many chose respecting privacy over protecting a child? There's a line between concern and interference, between being a caring neighbor and being intrusive. But where exactly does that line fall? When does respecting boundaries become enabling harm? These are uncomfortable questions without easy answers. But they must be asked because comfort is a luxury no one can afford when a child is dying. Systemic changes are desperately needed. Better healthcare access in rural areas. Medical debt reform so that families aren't bankrupted by illness. CPS reform to reduce fear among good parents who need help. Community infrastructure that makes early intervention natural and non-judgmental. Education about available resources, delivered persistently and compassionately. But systemic change takes time, and children are dying now. Marcus writes letters from prison. He attends grief counseling sessions and parenting classes, both of which feel like bitter ironies. He's become an advocate, in his way, sharing his story with anyone who'll listen. His message is simple and devastating. Don't be me. Don't let pride kill the person you love most. Ask for help. Beg for it if you have to. But don't stay silent. He'll carry Lily's death for the rest of his life. The sentence the judge imposed will end eventually, but the one he imposed on himself never will. This isn't just Marcus's story. It's about all of us, about the systems that fail families and the silence that enables tragedy. If this moved you, I need you to do something. Share this with someone who might be struggling alone. Hit that subscribe button so we can keep telling stories that matter, stories that challenge us to be better. And comment below what needs a change. What resources exist in your area? How can we make sure no parent has to choose between pride and their child's life? So we return to the question that opened this story. Was Marcus Reeves a bad father? The answer is heartbreakingly complex. He loved Lily desperately. That was never in question. He worked himself to exhaustion for her, kept her mother's memory alive, tried to provide safety and stability in a world that offered neither. His love was real, profound, the kind of fierce parental devotion that would have moved mountains if mountains could be moved by love alone. But love without action becomes negligence when action is desperately needed. Good intentions don't save lives. Medical care does. And when Marcus chose pride over pragmatism, fear over action, isolation over community, he made a choice that killed his daughter as surely as if he withheld food or water. This is what the case ultimately teaches us. Parenting means making impossible choices, but avoiding all choices is the worst choice of all. Sometimes there is no good option, only less bad ones. And sometimes protecting your child means admitting you can't do alone, means swallowing every ounce of pride, means asking for help even when asking feels like failing. Pride is a luxury no parent can afford when their child is sick. It's a comfortable feeling when nothing is at stake. But when life hangs in the balance, pride becomes poison. It's the voice that says, I should be able to handle this, when the only thing that matters is whether you do handle it, regardless of how. It's the emotion that prevents us from being honest about our limitations, and that dishonesty has a body count. If you're watching this and you relate to Marcus, if you're drowning in medical debt, if you're terrified of the system, if you're too proud to ask for help, please hear this. Asking for help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's strength. It's the most loving thing you can do for your child. If you're drowning in medical debt, bankruptcy is survivable. Your child's death is not. File for bankruptcy if you need to. Destroy your credit score if you need to. None of that matters compared to your child's life. If you fear Child Protective Services, they're not trying to steal children from loving parents who seek help. They intervene when children are in danger, and a child dying from a preventable illness is danger. The risk of seeking help is infinitesimal compared to the certainty of what happens if you don't. If you're too proud to ask, your child will never resent you for saving their life. They won't care that you had to accept charity or admit you needed help. They'll just be alive, and that's everything. Resources exist. Free clinics, charity care, community organizations, churches, nonprofits, neighbors who want to help. Find them. Use them. Survive. For communities watching who see themselves in those neighbors who noticed but stayed silent, this is your wake-up call. Notice the warning signs and act on them. Create systems where struggling parents can ask for help without shame. Check on your neighbors genuinely, not just politely. Connect people to resources they might not know exist. Sometimes minding your business means someone dies. Sometimes being a good neighbor means being an uncomfortable neighbor, means asking the hard questions, means calling the school or CPS or offering specific help rather than vague. Let me know if you need anything, statements that put the burden back on struggling people. The weight Marcus carries is incomprehensible. Every morning in prison, he wakes knowing that Lily would be alive if he'd made different choices. If he'd called 911 3 weeks earlier. If he'd swallowed his pride and asked Mrs. Kowalski for help. If he'd read that flyer about free clinics instead of throwing away. That knowledge is a sentence far longer and far crueler than any judge could impose. His story serves as a warning about the cost of silence, the price of pride, the way good intentions pave roads to unthinkable destinations. But Lily's legacy is more than just tragedy. Her death sparked real change in Timber Falls. Dozens of children have received free treatment through the program created in her name. Her story is told in parenting classes, community health workshops, social work training sessions across Oregon and beyond. She became the reason other children didn't die. That doesn't make her death meaningful. Nothing makes a 7-year-old's preventable death meaningful, but it makes her memory a catalyst for change, and perhaps that's the best anyone can do with unbearable loss. We live in a society that makes healthcare a privilege, then criminalizes parents who can't afford it. That is systemic failure we all share responsibility for. The politician who votes against Medicaid expansion bears responsibility. The pharmaceutical company that prices insulin beyond reach bears responsibility. The insurance company that denies claims bears responsibility. We all do collectively for allowing a system this broken to persist. But within that broken system, parents still have a choice. Not a fair choice, not an easy choice, but a choice nonetheless. Reach out or stay silent. Ask for help or suffer alone. Admit limitations or pretend strength that doesn't exist. Only one of those choices gives your child a fighting chance. Lily's story isn't just a tragedy. It's a warning and a call to action. If you're a parent struggling right now, please hear this. Asking for help is not failing your child. It's saving them. Your pride, your fear, your shame, none of it matters compared to their life. None of it. And if you know someone who might be Marcus, isolated, proud, drowning, reach out. Don't wait for them to ask. They won't. Send them this video. Start the conversation. Offer specific help. I'm driving to the clinic Saturday. Can I take your daughter? Not, let me know if you need anything. Like this video to help it reach people who need it. The algorithm doesn't care about important messages unless we tell it to. Subscribe to my channel so we can keep telling stories that challenge us to be better, to do better, to demand better from our systems and ourselves. And comment with resources in your area for families in crisis. Build a directory in the comments section. Make this video a resource, not just a story. Together, we can make sure Lily's name means something beyond tragedy. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is admit they need help. And sometimes the most loving thing a community can do is refuse to look away. Marcus learned that lesson too late. The neighbors learned it too late. The system that failed them both is learning it too slowly. But you're learning it right now. And that means you can still make a different choice. You can still reach out or be the person someone reaches toward. You can still save a life. Don't let pride or fear or silence write the ending.